preacher once says that the purpose of doctrine and teaching is not an end in itself, but it is to do what? To come to an understanding of a person, to come to a knowing of a person, and finally to come into fellowship with a person. All of these things that we're learning week after week is driving us to a greater relationship with God. And we are in the Old Testament still, in a very interesting book, as you've been with us, that deal with certain laws for a certain group of people, and we think to ourselves, maybe this has nothing to do with my life, but it's in the Bible, and there is something for us. And where we left off 2 weeks ago was how God is still giving through Moses to the people laws in different facets of society, the home, the government, financially, and all these different factors, and he's still on that sermon note. So we have different miscellaneous laws that we're going to explore, but again, as believers, we have something to draw from. So let's just jump right into it. In Deuteronomy chapter 25, Moses is continuing to build a system of justice for Israel by providing laws regarding how different offenses should be covered. And we read here in verse 1, if there is a dispute between men and they come into court and the judges decide between them, acquitting the innocent and condemning the guilty, then if the guilty man deserves to be beaten, the judge shall cause him to lie down and be beaten in his presence with a number of stripes in proportion to his offense. So, what we read from this is that it's possible for brothers to fight. And if brothers were to fight, they were to come to court. And as they come to court, the judge would decide who was guilty and who was righteous. And the guilty person who has committed a certain crime that did not warrant death. Why? Because there are certain sins committed in the Old Testament that warranted death. This is not one of those sins. And so it could be speaking of a wide range of different crimes. But here's one that deserves a physical punishment nonetheless. And what would happen is that there would be a process. The person who would be guilty would be brought before the judge. He would be laid down, most likely on his face, and his back would be exposed. And then there would be a beating in proportion to his offense. But no matter what the offense was, it was in a category of a crime that did not deserve for the person to die, or, hear this, we're going to read it, look at verse 3, 40 stripes may be given him, but no more. Lest if one should go on to beat him with more stripes than these, your brother be degraded in your sight. No matter how offensive the crime was, the judge could not allow that person to have more than 40 stripes as a punishment. And the whole reason why God gave these commands for Israel was so that the judges would never abuse their power. They would never exercise excessive discipline. This was to frame how they were to operate in dealing with a guilty individual. Because even judges can get wrong in how they treat others. But listen, this is not how we as the people of God operate and how we discipline. Not at all. But again, we're pushing through the verses and we're trying to get into the gold that might be hidden a little bit for us. When you and I hear these verses, you know what we have to understand? Something to say about God's discipline. When God disciplines, he never intends to degrade. He never intends to degrade a person in his discipline. That's what we see here, right? Never should it pass 40 stripes, lest the person be degraded in the sight of all the people. Wow. So yes, it warranted a physical punishment that would deter other people from performing the same crime, but it would never come to a point where they were embarrassed or shamed or brought to a state of animal-like treatment, whatever the cause. And that's God's heart to say, when I want to make a point in disciplining my children, it is never for the sake of exposing them to the place of humiliation. Brothers fight. It happens. It happens not just with Israel, it's going to happen in the church. I'm not going to ask who here has fought with another or disagreed with another brother, but you've probably seen it, you've probably been a part of it, you've probably been a victim of it, you've probably even caused it. Nonetheless, God has given the church authority to speak into matters between Christians in order to hopefully bring a righteous judgment that would provide a resolution. That is true. And just like in Deuteronomy, this is very important to understand, the church should never exercise their authority in such a way where when they come to a place of discipline even, because there are different sins that can be committed today that warrant different levels of intervention from the church, right? We see that in the New Testament. So you read of a guy in the book of Corinthians, the first book of Corinthians, who is messing around pretty much with his mother-in-law or mother, stepmother, and the church immediately says he has to get out of the church. He has to get out. There was no steps to that. It was like, this is a threat to the church. He needs to go because the church let it happen. And we're talking about a very messed up situation that required immediate removal of an individual. But that's not the case for all things. And so the church leaders must be able to be discerning enough to know how to implement discipline that would bring about peace and resolution, but never, ever, ever in a way that would shame or degrade a person as they are, even in a fallen state of sin. Never. I heard a testimony once, actually not too long ago, of a preacher's brother who was a worship leader. And this preacher's brother who was a worship leader was sitting in a church that was extremely legalistic. Everything was about rules, 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 rules. There was no sense of grace. There was no sense of God empowering you, no sense of the love of God. And this person who was a worship leader had a sin in his life. It was a secret sin that he was struggling with. And week after week after week, this worship leader would sit only to see his pastor come up and publicly expose people by name for their sins that they're struggling with. Makes you want to confess your sins, right? Makes you want to come and knock on your pastor's door and say, I have to admit something I'm struggling with, right? No, you know what happened? The guy totally backslid. Because the church's job is not to expose people to keep you in a place of shame and defeat. It is, yes, to help highlight certain things in your life, but ultimately to bring it to a place where you're restored and strengthened and taught and counseled so that you can walk on your own feet again. The church should never provide an environment of humiliation. Never. That is what this text in Deuteronomy is teaching. God, remember we learned 2 weeks ago, God really values human dignity. He really does. He's very understanding. He's very compassionate. Is he strong with his word? Yes. Does he have a cheap grace where he lets you stay in your sin? No, but even in dealing with your sin, it's not to put your face in the dirt and show everybody how dirty you are. Never. And that's important for us to know as brothers and sisters when we deal with other people's sin. Always in a spirit of gentleness. Always in wanting to see them restored. Always wanting to pray for them to come into the will of God. And whatever we have to do as a sacrifice, we will do for that to happen. So we read that. That's pretty clear, right? Then you go to verse 4 and it's like, where did that come from? Look at your Bibles. What does it say in verse 4? You shall not muzzle an ox when it is treading out the grain. So never blame a preacher when he goes on rabbit trails in his message, okay? He has his sermon, he has his manuscripts, and all of a sudden he says something. Moses did it. But there is a reason why he's doing this. It's because, what did we just speak about? Human what? Dignity. And so Moses is continuing with that thought to say that God is not just concerned about humans. Who else is he concerned about? Animals. Animals. So what does this law say? It's very simple, right? You shall not muzzle an ox while he is treading out grain. What does that mean? That as he's working in the field, you shouldn't shut his mouth where he cannot benefit from the sphere of his work and eat for himself in order to be strengthened to continue in his work. Do you know the Bible says much about God's care for animals? It's a beautiful picture of God's compassion and mercy and love, even towards creatures, four-legged beasts. Here's a verse, Proverbs 12:10. This is a nice one to note. We always think that righteousness is manifested in how we deal with one another. Absolutely, but that's not what Proverbs limits righteousness to. Whoever is righteous has regard for the life of his beast, but the mercy of the wicked is cruel. It's pretty straightforward, right? That a righteous person treats with compassion and care their pets at home. especially animals in this context that would serve for the sake of people's survival. They didn't abuse their animals. They didn't make them work to the bone. They considered them. And yet, in contrast, it says that the mercy of the wicked is cruel. You'd be amazed to know how many people are abusing animals for sport, how many people are abusing animals for gambling's sake, how many people are brainwashing animals to be vicious, and there's some sick pleasure with it. And this is exactly what it's saying. That a person who is wicked is numb to the benefit and the well-being of an animal to the point where they make them the monster that they are. It's a very tragic thing. And that's not just it. Remember the story of Jonah? What was the story of Jonah? Jonah, go preach to Nineveh. And he's like, that is not an invitation to a conference I'm going to accept. I'm leaving. And he goes literally, geographically, the direct opposite way. Why? Does anybody know why Jonah did that? Because he knew that God would have grace on the Assyrians. So it's not necessarily that he was afraid of the Assyrians. It's that he knew that if he were to go preach and they were to repent, God would actually not judge the people of Nineveh. This is how much this preacher had hatred in his heart for a people. He did not even want to see God forgive them and restore them, so he runs the other way because of how the Assyrians have treated the Israelites over the years. Finally, God brings him to the place of actually preaching. The guy preaches a one-sentence sermon, as recorded in the book of Jonah. Revival breaks out. Revival breaks out, and sure enough, from the king down to the animals, everybody's wearing ashes, sackcloth, repenting, broken before God. And Jonah was right. God relented on his wrath, turned from him, and the people knew it. And who's angry? Jonah. And Jonah gets all fussy and all baby-like and is whining. And then this is the last verse in the book of Jonah, which is very short, 4 chapters. The last verse. What is the last verse? Is God saying something to Jonah. And look what he says in Jonah 4:11. It is amazing because it's talking exactly what we're talking about. God says, because he sees this man heated, and he's trying to convince him to have his own heart. And he comes to this amazing statement. And should I not pity Nineveh, that great city in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know their right hand from their left? What does that last part say? And also much cattle. And also much cattle. Like he could have left that part out, but he wanted to include it because he cared for the animals too. And also much cattle. Isn't that amazing? That God didn't even, yes, obviously the human life, but he didn't want to destroy the livestock for that matter. And the point of the verse of Deuteronomy is again, that God values animal life, how much more human life. So we talked about how a human was to be treated. By the way, did Paul not say something about how he was treated with these lashes? What was Paul's resume when he was telling the church of his credentials for being an apostle? This is a random note, but can we see that I just did what Moses did? In 2 Corinthians 11:24, see what Paul says. I love to look at this because it almost makes me picture what the man looked like. 2 Corinthians 11:24, as Paul is telling the Corinthians who he is and what his ministry was like, and why he had the right as an apostle to be who he was over the Corinthians. 5 times I received at the hands of the Jews the 40 lashes less 1. So 39 times 5. What do you think the man's back looked like in suffering for Christ? We get a spiritual boo-boo on our finger and we're freaking out, ready to run away from our devotion to the Lord. And here's a man that's saying, look at my back. Look at all the scars on my back. 39 lashes minus 1 times 5. 40 minus 1 times 5. Look at my back. And you read that whole part, you see all the things he's been through on top of that. I'm sure you can tell who the Apostle Paul was just by the way he walked and all the beatings that he received as a servant of Christ. Interesting note. But coming back to the animals, we see that he brings this point up. And Paul uses that very same verse in verse 4 to make an argument for ministry. Because Paul is doing what we're doing every single week. He's looking at the text in the Old Testament and he's drawing out a principle from it. So look at this, not in 2 Corinthians, but in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 9. What does he say in 1 Corinthians 9:9? He is explaining why those who labor in the field of ministry should benefit from their sphere of work and receive payment from the gospel. And look what he says. For it is written in the law of Moses, you shall not muzzle an ox when it treads out the grain. And look what Paul says. Is it for oxen that God is concerned? Well, we just proved that God does care about the oxen and the cattle. And the righteous treat their animals with kindness. We proved that. But the principle there is, if he cares for the animals so much in their labor and receiving payment for their work, verse 10, look what he says in the next verse. Does he not speak entirely for our sake? It was written for our sake because the plowman should plow in hope and the thresher thresh in hope of sharing in the crop. So that's an encouragement to us as we were breaking down this text, right? He's drawing out principles, and that's what he did to make his point. If God cares about the animals and receiving reward and receiving payment for their work in their field, then the minister should also have the right in his work, in his field, to receive payment for his labor. Beautiful. Beautiful how the Old Testament and New Testament are working together. Now we come into another command. It has to do with marriage. And it's really interesting. Because again, we're talking about a different culture, a different time, a different covenant. And here's what it says in verse 5 down to verse 10. So if brothers dwell together and one of them dies and has no son, the wife of the dead man shall not be married outside the family to a stranger. So far we understand it, right? You got two brothers. One is married, doesn't have children, he dies. A brother is supposed to step in and take the wife. Why? Well, it tells us, her husband's brother shall go into her and take her as his wife and shall perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. And the first son whom she bears shall succeed to the name of his dead brother, that his name may not be blotted out of Israel. Old covenant, by the way, not in the New Testament. Old covenant. And what is that saying essentially? It's saying that there was an understanding in this culture, in this covenant, that if you were a man, you had property, you had an inheritance to give down to your generations. And so valuable was this to the eyes of God that if a man did not have children with his wife, the brother would assume the role of the deceased brother and give that woman children so that the first child would receive the inheritance that belonged to the deceased brother. And then therefore, that would continue for generations to come. That name would be protected, that lot would be protected, but also the widow would be in good hands. She also would be in safety as a result of this command being obeyed. That's a wonderful principle, but God is also realistic. Why is he realistic? Because if you didn't want to marry her, you didn't have to marry her. That's what it says, right, in verse 7? It says here, and if the man does not wish to take his brother's wife, then his brother's wife shall go up to the gate to the elders and begin to explain the situation. So, scenario, married, wife, I die, brother takes the wife, or doesn't. He comes up to the opportunity, he realizes what Moses said, and he goes, no, I don't want to. Now, in our natural minds, we think, sure, she's not his type, she's not his, they don't get along, whatever it may be. He's not attracted to her. Those are all fine and dandy things. But I don't think that's the immediate reason, or at least the main reason why a brother would say no. Does anybody have an idea why they would say no?
What about his own kids?
Okay, there's his own kids to consider. Is that what you're going to say as well?
Yeah, I was going to say he doesn't want to give his brother.
Well, I don't think the Bible would necessarily allow, it could be, but we don't see that here necessarily, where an already married man would take upon himself another wife. It could be, but I don't think that's there. This is assuming that a brother doesn't have a wife already.
Like financial, like inheritance and...
You're onto it. So break it down. What do you mean by inheritance?
Well, I guess his inheritance, he might have to give it to the kids that belong to this wife.
You're right. You're completely right. So here's how it would have worked. In fact, let's just go to an example. Let's go to Genesis 38. Let's flip our pages, just a few books back. Genesis 38. Genesis 38, we're introduced to Judah, and Judah does something interesting. He gives to his firstborn a wife named Tamar. Remember this story? And was wicked in the eyes of God. So God gets rid of So then there's another son, and it says here in verse 8, then Judah said to Onan, go into your brother's wife and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her. Now, this is prior to the law being established, so it's already assumed that this was a practice in the culture. But we see the situation, right? Dies, Tamar is without children and without a husband. So Judah says, Onan, you're the brother, come and fulfill your duty and provide children for Tamar. And what happens? Verse 9, but Onan knew that the offspring would not be his. And it goes on to say how he did marry her, but he didn't consummate fully. And he was messing around with the whole situation because he didn't want to give her children. For what reason? Well, if she has kids, then Judah's inheritance will go to the kids. But if she doesn't have kids, then what he will give will come to me. Do you see? So now we come to Deuteronomy 25, and we realize that this is perhaps a very strong reason why a woman who lost her husband is faced with an opportunity to get married, but the brother says, why? Well, in his mind, he's saying, I get to get the inheritance. And what he's saying out of his mouth could be a billion different false reasons. And so serious was this in this time, and so vulnerable would the widow be that she had the right to take the man, go to court, and explain the situation to the elders. And this is funny. You can just imagine how this would work. Look at verse 8. Then the elders of his city shall call him and speak to him, and if he persists. So the whole thing is like the guy's trying to convince him. Like, just take her as a wife. And you can just imagine these elders getting around the guy. Just take her as a wife. No, this is and he's persisting. He's saying, I'm not. Now, we don't know the reason. This could be a strong one. So what would happen? The widow, because of the situation we placed in, had the right to express her frustration. And what would she do? Well, we read. Verse 9, then his brother's wife shall go up to him in the presence of the elders, pull his sandal off his foot. To us, that might not mean like anything, but perhaps there is a disrespectful element, and spit in his face. That's cross-cultural. We understand that that's just disrespectful altogether. Old Testament, New Testament, it's just disrespectful. Spit in his face. And not only that, the guy would get a reputation in his home, and what would it be? Verse 10, and the name of his house shall be called in Israel, the house of him who had his sandal pulled off. I think the equivalent to that is literally your pants being pulled down. I could be wrong. That's not from any commentary or anything. But surely for your name to be called the guy who had his sandals pulled off means something embarrassing. Now we look at that, we laugh, we giggle, a little bit of humor, that's fine. But then I'm reading this last night and I'm thinking, Lord, what do we draw from this? Because that doesn't apply to marriages in our day at all. But I think there is something, in meditating upon this, I think there is something pretty practical. And if there's one thing that can be drawn from this, it's simply this. No relationship can ever survive if one or both parties harbor selfish ambition. In this context, a relationship couldn't even start because one guy potentially had that ambition in his heart. And let me tell you something, whether you start with that relationship or sometimes it creeps in later on, it will crumble, guaranteed. Want to know how you can ruin your relationship with your loved one? One simple thing, just be selfish. Just be selfish. That's all you have to do. Think of yourself, plan for yourself, seek to please yourself, and not have anybody else's rights in mind, whether on a friendship level, especially in a marriage context. That is a ticking time bomb. That is literally inviting suicide into your relationship. Not physically, but in the marriage bond. Just be selfish. This person didn't want to step into his moral responsibility. Okay, want to do it? Didn't even step into a relationship. But the principle is there. Beginning, middle, or end. When you and I allow ourselves to become self-centered, we invite destruction into our homes. When you get married, we talked about this a few Sundays ago, but it's good to rehearse it. When you get married, you have now opened your life to consider somebody else in every single thing you do. Everything. So much so that you are going to plan everything differently than you did when you were single. Proof? 1 Corinthians 7, Paul talks about marriage, and we spent a Sunday morning on that chapter. But look at verse 5. We didn't touch on verse 5 that Sunday morning. Do not deprive one another, except perhaps by agreement for limited time. When he means by deprivation, he's talking about physical intimacy. Because as a man, my body doesn't belong to me, it belongs to my wife. That wife, her body doesn't belong to her, it belongs to me. Mutual, right? It's not the man who has the right over the woman's body only. No, boys, it doesn't work that way. It's a mutual thing. Unless what? By agreement for a limited time. So there's a planning there. And what's the planning for? That you may devote yourselves to prayer. King James, New King James say prayer and fasting, but then come together again. So that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Okay, we understand, but that's the one point I want to see. The fact that they had to come to an agreement. We're going to spend this time in prayer and fasting. We're going to just have that isolated solitude with God during this week. Guess what? You don't do that when you're single. You don't. Do you go to, yeah, sure, maybe people you know, okay, that's fine. But in this simple example, we see how every sphere, including your spiritual life, is now shared with somebody else. Everything that you do now is linked to another person. Now, I'm not trying to say this to scare you. I'm just trying to tell you this so that you can remember what you're getting yourself into as you plan to be with somebody forever. It's something now that you share with another person. It's not something that you keep to yourself. Financially, and every other category you can think of is now blended with somebody else. But if selfishness comes in, you will know something of hell on earth, I can tell you that. That's why if you're looking for any quality in a person, listen, don't confuse religious activity with spirituality. Can I say that one more time? Don't confuse religious activity with spirituality. Do you know what I mean? Just because she goes to Bible study maybe twice a week, doesn't necessarily mean she's spiritual. That's a good indication. She wants the word of God. But look at the fruit of the Spirit more than anything else. You want to know spirituality? Look at the fruit of the Spirit. Don't look at necessarily Bible knowledge. That's important. That's great. If they don't know the Bible, they don't want to know the Bible, that's a bad sign. But don't merely look at Bible knowledge. Don't look at gifting. Don't look at religious activity only. Look for genuine spirituality. Is this person patient? Is this person faithful? Is this person loving? Is this person joyful? Does this person serve? Is this person selfish? Is this person materialistic? Is this person have different ambitions in life? Seek God to give you the eyes to see spirituality in somebody. And it comes, and you want to know how it comes? In the most practical things. You will save yourself from much. This is what we can learn of. Don't be the guy whose house is called the one who had his sandal pulled off. Now we come into random laws, more miscellaneous laws. And it gets even more intense. Verse 11. When men fight, a lot of fighting in this chapter. When men fight with one another, and the wife of the one draws near to rescue her husband from the hand of him who is beating him, so obviously one guy is beating up the other. That's the situation. One is overpowering the other, and the wife, out of her concern, what does she do? Puts her hand out and seizes him by the private parts. What is the consequence of such? Cut off her hand. That's what it says, right? Then you shall cut off her hand, your eyes shall have no pity. So we're still in the stream of a context of relationships being in strife, of fights, of disagreements. And this is not a text that attacks somebody who, out of natural emotion, wants to defend somebody that they love. That's not what the text is. Because it's very specific, right? This is a text that's condemning an act that would not only seek to defend, but more than defend, attack the possibility of innocent lives being affected as a result. How so? Because the command is against somebody reaching and attempting to damage the reproductive parts of an individual. That's what we have in mind here. That somebody would do so much damage to a man that they don't have the ability to bring children into the world. That's why the consequence is so severe. And so this is why this judgment is so, what we would say severe, is because it would be a deterrent for anybody from even thinking that. Because even in that kind of a situation, there is so many other options than going for that one. And so God is concerned about the man. He's concerned about his future and his ability to be a father and to what? To fulfill what God had commanded from the beginning. Be fruitful and multiply. And so this is a strong warning for anybody that would try to interfere with that command trying to be fulfilled. And again, we're faced with another text where we go, I get the physical understanding there, I get the implication, but then what can I draw from that? And though this is in the context of a wife lovingly being protected for her husband, I think if there's anything to draw from this is the Bible rule from cover to cover to distance yourself from any situation that is hostile and to never include yourself in drama. That if there is a scenario of people that I even know that are going at it with one another, and not just on a physical level, on an emotional level, on an argumentative level, on a drama level, I must, for the sake of my own hand, so to speak, not include myself, but be wise enough to distance myself. He's saying, is that really a principle in the Bible? It is. And there's a verse that speaks clearly on it. Look at this in Proverbs 26:17. Now remember, we're trying to be a wise people, and this is what wisdom includes. Whoever meddles in a quarrel not his own is like one who takes a passing dog by the ears. Simple as that. Think about that. I want you in your mind right now to think that you're walking down the street and you see a rabid, loose, stray dog. And for some reason, you are compelled to look at the dog and not pet the dog, but grab it by the ear. What do you think would happen to you by grabbing the dog by the ear? You are enhancing the risk of you getting bit. And this is how the Bible parallels how one is seeing a passing situation that is heated, that has nothing to do with you, and you, for some reason, being compelled to include yourself in it. And there are many reasons for that, and here's one, because one of the two are inviting you into the drama, and you invite yourself into it. It is just like you grabbing the ear of a dog and thinking that nothing's going to happen. If I choose to involve myself in something for the sake of thrill, because I have nothing else going on in my life, I am surely increasing the possibility that I'm going to get bit and I'm going to get harmed in it. So a wise person knows how to leave things that do not include my business, don't include my name, to leave it with those people to figure out between them and God and the spiritual leaders that are over their lives. Listen, I don't know about you. I have enough drama with spiritual warfare and the devil and all these different things. I don't need to add more on my life. I don't want to invite myself into that. May that ever be a principle in your life. To say, Lord, as much as let me clear myself from any of these things. And this is part of spiritual maturity. You know, for some people, they have nothing going on in their lives. That drama is the only thing that keeps things exciting. It's true. Look at 1 Timothy. It talks about young widows that if they don't get themselves busy, they get into what? Busybody and gossip. They go from house to house and they speak about other people. And one of the advices of Paul is get them married, get them busy. See, when a person is not busy, and a person is not doing things, practical things, spiritual things, serving God, they open themselves up to grabbing dogs' ears. And things can get messy real quick. Practical things from Deuteronomy.25, huh? Now we come to verse 13. Down to verse 16. We're not going to touch on this in detail. It deals about doing honest business. Business meaning economic transactions. That as the people of God, we must have integrity in the realm of money. In the realm of money. And all these verses have to deal with is that you would not manipulate your scale for the sake of receiving more from a buyer or under purchasing what is deserved. I'm not talking about bargaining, I'm talking about manipulating a scale. So for example, my brothers and I, when we grew up with our father, he still does work at a farmer's market, and one of those things was we would sell cheese. That's right. And we would cut pieces of cheese and we would put it on a scale, and based on the scale's weight would determine the price of the product. And that's a modern way of how to interpret this. You know, today it is possible for you to manipulate a scale, right? You can manipulate it so you take a piece of cheese that's half a pound in actuality, and when you place it on the scale, you can manipulate the scale in such a way that it goes up to be 3/4 of a pound, and then you charge for that. And that's why even legally, you have people that come in to test your scales to see if they are genuine, they are honest in what you place on it. And all this is saying is, be honest in your dealing with money. Be honest in your, listen, if you're gonna be tempted in any place with your devotion to Christ, realize mammon will call your name daily. Mammon will be the greatest temptation for the people of God, especially in the West. Many people have divorced themselves from true devotion to God because of their love for another God, and that is money. I find it quite amazing that Jesus did not say you cannot serve two masters. He didn't say God and sex. He didn't say God and fame. He didn't say God and gluttony. He said God and money. You cannot serve two masters. And the thing that Jesus had in mind, in the competitive God, little g, that would fight for the affections and the honesty and the devotion of the people of God was money. Money. And this is what this text is teaching. Now, really, this is, I believe, is a very vital part of Deuteronomy.25, where we're going to spend a lot of our attention. He steps away from specific laws that deal with specific issues, and he wants to bring in something that he has in mind for the people as they go into the promised land concerning a people group. Let's read it together. Verse 17. Remember what Amalek did to you on the way as you came out of Egypt. So Moses stops his very practical sermon, and he looks at the people and he goes, I want you in this moment, people of Israel, to remember what Amalek has done to you. Now, when is the last time we've heard about Amalek? Can anybody answer? When was the last time we heard about Amalek? Exodus 17. For those who were there Wednesday, we did this in Bible quiz, Exodus 17. We had an impromptu Bible quiz on Wednesday after prayer. Exodus 17 was where we are introduced and how Amalek dealt with Israel. And what happened was Israel was freshly saved out of Egypt, were they not? And they were brought into the wilderness to go into the promised land. And all for a sudden, in verse 8 of chapter 17, out come the Amalekites and they attack the people of Israel. This is the first experience of warfare outside of Egypt. Now, what's so important about that was that it was so offensive to God, that they were so vulnerable and they were in their infancy as a people, that they had no compassion, no mercy, no consideration, that God had sealed their judgment for all time and that they would be eradicated as a people in the promised land when the people would be established. So serious was this to God that the Amalekites would cease to exist as a consequence, and he would use Israel as the instrument of his judgment against them. This is severe. But what we're about to read here are details. Again, here's another reason why we don't skip books of the Bible. What we're going to read here are examples of how you and I get details to a story that we wouldn't have got when we first read the story. So look, we don't read about these details. What do we read? Verse 18, how he attacked you on the way when you were faint and weary. We don't read that detail necessarily as explicitly. And cut off your tail, those who were lagging behind you, and he did not fear God. I present to us today at this Bible study how this is a strong illustration, Amalek, of how the enemy, mainly how our flesh deals with us as the people of God, okay? This detail is found in Exodus, it's not found here, but it's worth mentioning. When specifically did Amalek come and attack? Think of the chapter, and I encourage you to even turn there in Exodus 17. When specifically, what was done right before Amalek came to wage war against the people? Striking the rock, and what happened with that rock? Water came out. Remember the story? The people were thirsty, and they were crying out to Moses, complaining, are we going to die from thirst in this place? And Moses took that complaint to God, and God gave him instructions. He says, go to that rock, strike it, and as a result, water will come out, and it will quench the thirst of all the people. Think about how much water came out of that rock. And so when he struck it, surely it happened. It's a picture of salvation. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 10 that it's a picture of Christ, who was that rock, who provided living water. And they drank deeply from it. But in a general sense, it's a picture that God blesses his people. God can manifest his power and his provision in times of need. And when God blesses his people, you read that they were drinking, and then you read in verse 8 that Amalek came to attack. Know this, that the enemy loves to attack when you're experiencing God's blessing. Because the enemy would love to do anything to divert your love, your passion, your excitement, your thanksgiving towards God, and frustrate that. The enemy will attack a church that's experiencing God's blessing. The enemy will try to send in reinforcements to try to distract a family that is being devoted to God. Wherever there is God's blessing, surely the enemy will try to come and do something about it. One person quoted a very well-known phrase that whenever there are showers of blessings from heaven, you and I must also expect blast from hell. It's possible. It's possible. You see with Elijah, he sees revival happen, fire comes down from heaven, and just a few moments later, you have Jezebel say, I'm going to do to you what you did to them, and he runs into the wilderness. That's not to make us afraid. That's not to make us not want God's blessings. It's to keep us aware, though, that the enemy will not sit back when you're experiencing victory in Christ, when you taste something of Christ. Temptation will come. I cannot tell you the amount of times that I've talked to individuals and counseled them, especially those who have backslidden and they want to come back to Christ, or those who do not know Christ and want to know Christ. I say, listen, we've had this conversation. You heard the message. You're interested. You're convicted. Now let me give you a warning. Between now and you growing in your salvation, expect turbulence in your faith. And I cannot tell you the amount of times that I received texts from people saying, I'm getting calls from people I haven't talked to in months. I'm getting people coming up. Where did these girls come from before I wanted to follow Christ? Now they're coming out of the woodworks. Where did all this money out of perversion come from? An opportunity to make so much more before I had this conversation. Well, it's because you're tasting something of Christ, and Amalek wants to come after you. Believe that. Not only that, we see something very important in this text in Deuteronomy. Amalek will attack when the people of God are faint and weary. What does it say here? How he attacked you on the way when you were faint and weary. Oh, when he sees that we are weak. He is so unmerciful. He is so lacking in love that he wants to destroy you in that state. He doesn't wait till you're strong. Now, this is talking about physical weariness, and that can be true for us physically too. that when you don't rest, when you don't take care of your body, when you don't walk in balance in life, the enemy can use that to his advantage. That's what happened to Elijah. The angel comes after he saw fire come from heaven, and Jezebel threatens him. The angel didn't say fast and pray. He says, eat your food, drink, and go to sleep. Wakes up, he's like, let's do this again. Eat, drink, go to sleep. Sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is just take a nap. Be free from that. Be free from this idea that you have to beat your body. Sometimes your body, the vehicle that God has given you, needs rest. But the faint and weary can be so much more threatening spiritually. Spiritually. That when you and I are faint and weary spiritually, think of it physically. If I were to not eat for 4 days and barely drink water, and I wrestle against Barrett, do you think it's going to take much for Barrett to push me over? Never mind, it could be anybody. Do you think it would take much for a guy who hasn't eaten in 4 days? Is it going to take much struggle, or is it going to just take one shove for me to fall on my back? Now we look at that physically and we go, yeah. Then we think spiritually and we think we can not eat for 3 weeks and be okay when Satan comes to our door. Here's an example that I heard. This is not my illustration, but it blessed me and I hope it will bless you. Please pay attention. When you and I, before we come to Christ, we are the old man. The Bible describes our person before Jesus as the old man. Now I want you to imagine that your heart is a house and that you, before Christ, are the old man and you are the host of that house. And I want you to imagine a gang of robbers outside of the house, and one of them is lust, the other one is perversion, the other one's the love of money, the other one is drug abuse, whatever. And they come to your door. As the old man, because you were not regenerated, you open that door and you let them come in. And in your house is peace, joy. In your house is purity. And you let that, and they come in and they destroy everything. And you have no problem with it. They're your buddies. Listen to this. When you come to Christ, the Bible tells us that we crucify the old man. And what God does by the Spirit is He kills the old man. In your heart, the old man doesn't exist anymore. He puts in the new man. A person that lives for Christ, loves Christ, that doesn't want those gang of robbers to come in anymore. So now, as the new man in the heart, which is your house, for your life, for your soul, when those gang of robbers come in again as the new man, you don't open the door and let them in. You resist. You close the door, you put your shoulder against the door, and you fight it, and they're knocking and they're beating, and some days are stronger than others. But you know what many Christians do, although they've had the old man dead and the new man come to life? They don't feed the new man. So 2 days have passed by, and here's the new man holding back those gang of robbers, lust and perversion and drug abuse and pornography and all these things. And the man hasn't eaten. You haven't fed the new man in 4 days. Do you think it's going to take much for the gang of robbers to kick the door open and come in and do what they want in your house? It baffles me that people don't see it that way, that I must feed the new man in order for him to be strong daily. Not conference after conference, not once a week where somebody feeds me something at a Bible study, but daily. And as much as you feed the new man, he will be strong to resist. It doesn't mean temptation won't come. Oh, they'll budge, they'll push, but you have strength in the new man because you fed him. I present to you today that most of the failure of Christians in their victory over sin is that they fail to feed. They fail to feed, and then they wonder why. Amalek will attack when you are faint and weary. But thirdly, Amalek will attack specifically those who are lagging behind. What does it say? How he attacked you on the way when you were faint and weary and cut off your tail, specifically. Cut off your tail, those who are lagging behind you. So picture it. When Exodus 17, you don't get these details in Exodus 17. Amalek had victory over those who were trailing behind. And so it is with the people of God today. That if you so choose to distance yourself from the core group, those who are walking in the will of God, those who are walking and advancing God's purposes, if you want to distance yourself, guaranteed, there is no exception, you are exposing yourself to be a greater threat for the enemy to take advantage of you. Happens all the time. I'll tell you how it happens. That person just stops coming to church. Sporadic presence. That person starts serving in ministry, not cold turkey, but just lagging. That person stops hanging around with the people of God. They stop sitting under the word of God being declared over them. And they are now lagging. They're not completely cut off, but they're just lagging. And then all for a sudden the enemy comes because of that place of vulnerability. And they didn't see it coming, but it came from one failure, and that is to stay near and close to the herd. It is said that sheep are not very defensive animals. They don't have claws. They don't have paws. They don't have intimidating teeth. So apparently, one of their defense mechanisms is that when a predator does come, all they do is they run around in circles or just run, and they try to stay in the pack. They just run, and hope that they don't get caught. And you see this even in the wild today, that when a cheetah will come to a group of antelope or whatever, oftentimes all that cheetah is waiting for the antelope to do is for one to divert from the group. And he forgets the group and he goes after the one. Don't isolate yourself. Don't distance yourself. Don't separate yourself. Even if you're struggling in your walk, the worst thing that you can do is lag behind where the people of God are going. Stay connected. Stay with the group. Stay accountable. Even if you're messing up, mess up with the people of God around you to pray over you, to counsel you, to shield you. Because the moment you start lagging is the moment you start exposing, and Amalek has no problem now of taking you out easier. I hope that makes sense. And then what we see here in verse 19, therefore when the Lord your God is giving you rest from all your enemies around you, and the land that the Lord your God is giving you for an inheritance to possess, you shall blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. You shall not forget. Man, if Amalek is a picture of sin of the flesh, what a wonderful tone to deal with our flesh. Get rid of it. Remember what Amalek did to you. Remember what sin has done in your life. Remember the guilt it has provided. Remember the shame. Remember all these nasty things that it came with it. Go to war with Amalek. Now you get this tone and you feel how God is serious about this. So much so that it helps us understand another story. Where's a very important story that deals with Amalek that we see later on in the Old Testament? Can anybody shed some light on it? What story do we see of God continuing his narrative from this very place in Deuteronomy 25 of war going out against Amalek? Think of when Israel established a physical kingdom with a physical king. 1 Samuel 15. If we could put that up, please. Well-known story. When Samuel, the prophet, approaches King who? Saul. Saul was the first king of Israel. And because of that, God was going to use him to do much, including what we're about to read. And Samuel said to Saul, the Lord sent me to anoint you king over Israel. Now therefore listen to the words of the Lord. Thus says the Lord of hosts, I have noted what Amalek did to Israel in opposing them on the way out when they came out of Egypt. Verse 3. Now go and strike Amalek and devote to destruction all that they have. Do not spare them, but kill both man and woman, child and infant, ox and sheep, camel and donkey. Full stop. So we read Deuteronomy 25, and we read later on in 1 Samuel, hundreds of years later, we realize how serious this is to God. That this is not just a random command. This is an ancient command that God had. And now he was going to use Saul to make it come to pass. And when you read on in 1 Samuel 15, what happens? Does anybody know the story? Peter?
When he was told to destroy everything and keep no plunder, and he didn't do that?
What did he do? Did he destroy all the Amalekites?
He sacrificed to the Lord.
Close. That was his motive for something.
He saved the livestock.
He saved the livestock, and who else did he save? the king. So Saul says, Samuel, prophet, I understand, and I must be familiar with God had said in Deuteronomy.25, I'll do it. He goes out on his campaign. Samuel comes on the scene, already with the knowledge of Saul's disobedience. And Saul comes out and says, Samuel, I've obeyed all that the Lord has said. I'm paraphrasing here. And Samuel says, oh yeah? Yeah. Because then why am I hearing the bleating of sheep? And Samuel confronts Saul because Saul was convinced by the people around him, his own soldiers, to keep the livestock and to keep the king as a trophy. And the excuse was, well, God would want these animals to be sacrificed. And Samuel says what? That famous phrase, obedience is greater than sacrifice. So serious was Saul's disobedience that we read later on in verse 26 of chapter 15 that the kingdom was removed from Saul. And he has cut off the opportunity for him to generationally know a lineage of kings. And Samuel was told by God that he is now going to look for somebody whose heart is after my own heart, who would do everything that I say. And we know that God is not acting or overreacting by doing so, because we realize in Deuteronomy.25, this is something that he established in the roots of the people of God. This was something that he really wanted to happen as a manifestation of his righteous judgment. Now listen to this. This is not where it ended for Saul. It's not. Saul goes on this unfortunate rage of jealousy because a few chapters later, actually one chapter later, we see that David is anointed as king. We see chapter 17, chapter 18, David slays Goliath. All the people are praising David. They are pumped about this young guy. He has the anointing of God upon him. God's power is with him. God's favor is with him. And who's upset about it? Saul. And Saul sees David as a threat more than as a friend. And he begins now to have this competitive spirit within him that literally drives the man mad. What's scary about the fact that Saul lost that relationship with God is that he was still king, man. That is one of the scariest pictures in the Old Testament, I believe. That Saul lost the voice of God, but God still let him be king. Man, what is ministry if you lose intimacy with God? What is ministry if you lose intimacy with God? But Saul didn't care as much because he saw his position as his identity. So even when he was caught by Samuel for not fulfilling what God told him to do, his repentance was not genuine. He wasn't like David that says, oh, against you and you only have I sinned. He goes, okay, yeah, I sinned. Okay, I get it. But listen, Samuel, can you walk with me before the elders so that nobody knows that we have a disagreement going on? Like, this is where the guy's head was. And one of the saddest figures in the Old Testament is Saul, I believe. Because the guy walks hollow, though he is still king. You see plenty of examples where God doesn't speak to Saul. And I'm like, who cares about the crown? Who cares about the title? Who cares about serving God and doing things for him if you lose that nearness? It's not worth it. And that's what David was concerned when he got caught in sin. He's like, oh, I don't want to lose the nearness of the Holy Spirit. It gets worse for Saul. You come to the end of the book of 1 Samuel, Saul goes to war with the Philistines. It doesn't end good for Saul. Saul goes to war, the Philistines are taking over, Saul's sons die. Saul is severely wounded by archers that have shot arrows into him. And Saul realizes that he's gonna die, but he does not want to die at the hands of the Philistines, so he comes up with a plan to commit suicide. So we read in 1 Samuel 31:4, then Saul said to his armor bearer, draw your sword and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and mistreat me. But his armor bearer would not. He's like, armor bearer, kill me. I don't want the Philistines to get me. And his armor bearer's like, and he goes, fine, you won't do it? What happens? Therefore Saul took his own sword and fell upon it. He put the thing in the ground and he literally fell upon the sword so that it can pierce him through. And then you read that and you see how tragic of a death it was until you go to the next book, 1 Samuel 31, right? You go to 2 Samuel chapter 1, and David is with his band of soldiers because he's been running from Saul for such a long time. And all of a sudden, this guy comes running in, and he's winded, and he's coming to bring news about what happened to Saul. And he tells the story of how Saul had died, and David is asking details. And as he asks details, you see something quite astounding that should literally pierce our hearts. What happens? Listen to this. In 2 Samuel 1, verse 6. And the young man who told him said, now listen, he's explaining the story. By chance, I happened to be on Mount Gilboa, and there was Saul leaning on his spear. We just talked about that, right? So he's saying, by chance, I came up on Mount Gilboa, and I looked over, and I saw Saul leaning on his spear. And as he sees Saul, it says here, behold, the chariots and horsemen were close upon him, verse 7. And when he looked behind him, so the man has a spear behind him, and he looks and he sees this man. He looked behind him. He saw me and called to me, and I answered, here I am. And he said to me, who are you? And I answered him, I am an Amalekite. I am an Amalekite. And he said to me, stand beside me and kill me, for anguish has seized me, and yet my life still lingers. So I stood beside him and killed him, because I was sure that he could not live after he had fallen. And I took his crown that was on his head and the armlet that was on his arm, and I brought them here to my Lord. Here's the principle. God called Saul to kill the Amalekites. And because Saul did not kill the Amalekites, the Amalekite killed Saul. You know, if Saul would have taken care of that and totally obeyed the Lord, this wouldn't happen. Now, you have scholars that debate whether this Amalekite was fabricating the story or whether it was genuine. Let's say it wasn't fabricated and this was a true account. Here's the principle. If God tells you to get rid of your sin and you don't get rid of your sin, if you don't kill that sin will come around and kill you. If you do not deal with that sin, trust me, that sin will not be as merciful as you've been to that sin. It will come and it will kill you. That's the lesson. Kill the Amalekites completely. 98%. I'll keep Agag and I'll keep some sheep. Many chapters later, just like many people in their life, because they don't deal with it at the foundational level, it will manifest in a murderous level down the road. I know that's a very heavy word for the first Bible study of 2020, but maybe that's what we need in the first Bible study of 2020. Kill the Amalekite before the Amalekite kills you. And that's how we're ending our Bible study. And you know what's wonderful? Is that if Saul's heart was right, God would have given him victory over the Amalekites. Because Saul's heart was about so many other reasons than pleasing God, he could not even perform the thing. He could not even perform it because you hear what he says in 1 Samuel 15. He's honest. At least he's honest to give us some insight. He goes, Samuel, you're right. It's because I feared the voice of the people that I did not obey. Wow. So you have the soldier that said, I know that Samuel said kill, but Saul, think about what you can have. You can have King Agag, and look at the sheep. We could honor God with it. Just take it. It's not a big deal. Kill 98%, but don't get rid of all of them. And there's Saul listening, and he's going, you're right. Okay. Not knowing that on a mountain one day, an Amalekite would be the reason for his demise. Man, it's scary when you listen to other voices, including your own, except God's. It's a scary place to be. When God says get rid of it, he means get rid of it. And when God says get rid of it, he will empower you to get rid of it. And this is not to hammer people that are wrestling with a sin. I'm saying you keep fighting the sin. And you don't make it a trophy in your life or don't think you can manage it. See, Saul thought, I can manage this. Saul thought he could manage willful disobedience. You can never manage it. But if you're going to fight, keep fighting. Keep fighting. In fact, go to Exodus 17. I want to look at a different perspective with the Amalekites. So this is the original context when they were going to war with Amalek, and there was a victory. There was a victory. Joshua provided victory because Moses, Aaron, and Ur were on the mountain and they lifted their hands to pray. And when you have prayer and you have a willingness to go to war, victory can happen. But look at what the Lord says at verse 16 of chapter 17. Saying, a hand upon the throne of the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. Yes, it was fulfilled at total destruction. That will happen one day. But that's the same mentality we have to have with the flesh. We go to war with it continually. We don't stop going to war with Amalek. We keep going to war. We keep fighting. We're defeated when we stop. We're defeated when we give up. We're defeated when we let Amalek live in the promised land. It can't happen. He must go. And if he's going to resist, if you're going to fail, if it's going to be a longer campaign, keep fighting Amalek. Don't give up. Don't give up. And one day he'll be blotted out forever and we'll be in the presence of Jesus and we'll be like him and he'll transform our lowly bodies to be like his glorious body. But until then we go to war. It's going to get bloody. It's going to get bloody. But let's go back to those principles. If you're faint and weary, Amalek's going to have victory over you. It's just a matter of time where he's going to push you over and that's all it's going to take. If you're lagging behind and you are not in community and you are not near the people of God who love God and are fighting with that same fight, you're bound to put yourself on the bullseye of a target. Don't give up fighting Amalek. And if you have become relaxant over these past few weeks, remember this. If you don't kill Amalek, he'll kill you. Let's bow our heads and pray. You know what we're going to do in this first Bible study of 2020? We're going to ask God to give us strength and power. We're going to ask God to give us stamina. We're going to ask God to give us the encouragement to go to war with the things that are trying to kill us. The things that are trying to wipe you off the map, the things that are trying to hinder your testimony, the things that are trying to hold you back from knowing a nearness of God. We're going to pray specifically in this new year for a fresh hatred for the things that God hates. To fully follow the Lord is not just to love what he loves, it's also to hate what he hates. It's not just to love what he loves, it's to also hate what he hates. And the same way that God put in your heart a love for the things that he loves, he'll also put in your heart a hatred for the things that he despises. Don't feel defeated today. You've come to a Bible study to give you hope that the Lord will fight with you against Amalek. Didn't we just read that? That the Lord will go to war against Amalek from generation to generation. Partner with the Lord tonight. Partner with God tonight. Say, Lord, tonight I want to obey you completely and go to battle with this thing. I don't want it to take me out. I don't want it to just sneak up on me one day like it did Saul. I want to know a victory. I want to know at least that I'm fighting and resisting it. And at least resisting it. I don't want to give it way in my life. Let's just do that. The worship team can play softly in the background. Let's just pray. Just talk to the Lord and ask him for that. Give me victory, God. Forgive me, God. If I've become light with my sin, forgive me if I've not seen the possibility of the danger that it can bring in the future. God, I'm believing that you are for me, not against me. I believe you do not condemn me, but you want to see me conquer. Lord, my heart, let it be like David's. Let it be like David's. To see that the only thing that sin would threaten in my life, more importantly, is my walk with you. That's what I'm concerned about, Lord. I'm concerned about how this sin will hinder my relationship with you. I'm not concerned about position. I'm not concerned about reputation as much. I'm not concerned about what my family will think. I'm not concerned about all those are valid reasons, but Lord, above it all. Give me a heart. Give me a heart like David's. Only then will I know how to fight. Only then will I have a reason to say no when it comes to my door. God, we ask that your presence would manifest so strong in this place. We pray that it would manifest so tangibly in this place, that it would give us a taste of your sweetness. It would give us a taste of your love. It would give us a taste of your goodness, Lord, and it would change our appetite, Lord. It would change our appetite, Lord. We sit here and we wait on the Lord. Those who wait on the Lord shall not be put to shame. Those who wait on the Lord will rise up like eagles. Their strength shall be renewed. We wait on you. Wait on you, God.